Bodó has written extensively, prolifically, and in fact astonishingly so on the topics of hacktivism and shadow libraries and so forth. And on that note, Bodó's talk, I think, promises to be something on the tumultuous current state of the shadow library, exploring alternative path to the story that the Open Knowledge Commons may take from now on. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bodó.
Thank you very much. Forgive me, do you mind if I sit? Because I need my computer, but it's rather short, and I'm also short-sighted, so I cannot be very far from what I would like to present. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm feeling a little bit strange because I don't know where I am. And I'm still not 100% convinced that this is not a CIA stinch to round up people in the shadow library scene, and just we're gonna find ourselves in a plane towards Guantanamo in half an hour. That's I haven't ruled out completely. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I won't be very smooth. Usually I like to give smooth presentations, but now I thought it would be a really nice opportunity to actually present something, a work in progress, and have this wonderful crowd to actually throw out ideas that might not be polished and might be controversial, and I would like to invite criticism, and hopefully we can use some time to actually discuss some of the ideas that I'm about to put forward. I won't be as coherent as I would like to be, also because of the topic. And I chose the title to be the Knowledge Singularity. Knowledge in the sense that knowledge that is being produced by the scholarly communities as we are standing on each other's shoulders, using public funds, trying to provide or trying to make science. And singularity, not in the Ray Kurzweilian sense. I'm not here to speak about the age of artificial intelligence, but rather deal with completely natural, dumb human stubbornness. I would like to use the term singularity in the mathematical or mechanical term. In mechanics, singularity is a state of a system or a machine where you cannot predict its future. And in mathematics, singularity is the point where functions stop behaving well, like 1 per x at point 0. And this is my argument is that we are currently living in this, living through a type of singularity in terms of knowledge economies or knowledge production, where we ended up where we are at the moment, and this where we are is actually this very unhealthy space where copyright is stronger than ever. It has all the resources and power on earth, legal, enforcement, sometimes military, political, but it has never been weaker because of the technological countermeasures. And this has, of course, spawned an extreme level of control and extreme commodification and enclosure of the public domain. We are all familiar with these stories and narratives, and of course, it has led to a historically unprecedented level of piratical activity, copyright infringing activity. And this is the here where we are now. I think that we didn't have any choice but to end up here. I will tell you why I think that. But the question is, where do we go from here? Right? This is where we are now is a stalemate, right? It's an impasse. It's very difficult to see how this current state will be resolved. What kind of future will we have in a year, 2 years, how this current tension and this current conflict will be put to an end, which is not like the peace in the Middle East, or it's not like the mission accomplished in Iraq or in Afghanistan, but a lasting and sustainable armistice, which at least meets with the approval of the key stakeholders, not just the publishers, not just the people in power, but those people on the global south, or those people without access who are currently producing those forces that are contesting the status quo. And this is the reason of this whole idea of singularity, because I don't know what kind of aids and what kind of ideas we can actually bring forward to predict what will happen next week. What are the tools that can be mobilized to actually talk about or discuss chaotic systems? What are the tools that we can actually ask to help us to understand a system with emergent properties, which are very hard to predict? And I really love the work on this of Manuel de Landa, who has been describing a really nice tool set that I will try to put in sporadic use in this talk, to describe systems with emergent properties. He talks about possibilities within a system, possibilities possessed by the actual constituents of a system, their abilities or their lack of abilities to move in one direction or another. He talks about the capacities of the system to change, and the capacities of the system constituents to change, or the lack of capacities to do so. He talks about gradients, tensions, pressures, stresses, which drive a system to one direction or another. These gradients are putting the actual energy into the system, and the attractors define those gradients. And finally, to sum all these systems, even with chaotic or emergent properties, tend to have tendencies of changing, outcomes that are more probable than others. And I would like to use this framework from him to actually try to make sense of where we are now and what are our options for the future. So let me start with the gradients, with the tensions, with the schisms in the system, which created this current conundrum around library genesis and Sci-Hub, and this general prominence of shadow libraries and shadow librarianship, and many of the lawsuits that some of you are part of, and this whole conflict. The schisms are between the desired and the desirable and the actual and the potential. All those different alternative paths we could take what to do. What is desired, what I see is being described as desired, is some kind of an unconditional universal access. This is a direct descendant of Aaron Schwartz's guerrilla open access manifesto. He planted this idea that we need to take information and liberate it from closed proprietary databases and make them open access. And if it comes at the cost of breaking unjust laws, then we should do that, right? It's a knowledge liberation movement. It's a tactical use of media which does not want to actually achieve occupy territory. It uses the other's territory to have some tactical advantage. And, but I'm not sure that's actually what's the desirable outcome or the desirable alternative, because access or very little open access in this sense is only preoccupied with the final step of a quite complex process, which starts with public money being turned by people like us into research and findings and ideas and papers and books and courses and programs in universities, where we need or where we have or where we work with third parties which disseminate our ideas, which print them out or which make them accessible to libraries. And publishing is not just a tool of dissemination, but also a quality assurance mechanism for the higher education system itself, where tenure and academic advancement is based on or relies on this whole system of dissemination. So the question for me in this sense is, can we separate the access part from everything that precedes access? Everything that access relies on, actually, can we separate guerrilla open access from the actual processes that produce that we want to liberate from closed and proprietary databases? And if we look at it from a systemic perspective, then the question of what is the sustainable alternative is something that we cannot remain silent on. What is the sustainable system from the beginning to the end, which at the end produces accessible knowledge, but at the beginning is able to produce accessible knowledge? Of course, the biggest tension is between the actual and whatever we desire, right? This intransparent system, which Marcel and Tom describes as a denial of service attack on humanity, right? A system that denies access to readers, denies payments to authors. They will be much more qualified to describe that. So, of course, the biggest tension is between the actual and what we can dream of, or what's the potential there. And this potential is brought forward by the actual technological ability to produce an age-old dream of the universal library, right? It's not impossible anymore. It has been always impossible to create the universal library. Now it's just simply illegal, and that's the promise. This tension between the actual and the potential is the greatest driving force of all that is happening within this domain, or that has been happening for the last decade or so. Well, at least guerrilla open access has proven the point that it is possible to create the proof of concept of the universal library. Right? It's not perfect. It's not a smooth running machine, but at least it's a very good proof of concept that it's possible. It can be peer-produced. Libraries can be peer-produced. Libraries can be distributed. They can be built bottom-up. They require resources orders of magnitude lower or less than what we usually spend on libraries. They can be based on voluntary labor. They can be based on surplus capacities. They can be based on tactical and strategic appropriation of proprietary resources, and that's a very important finding. That's something that upends the history of libraries or archives in general, which have always been those massive palaces of power and knowledge, which do not require anything like that anymore. And it seems like that this proof of concept is a very homogeneous thing that we arrived to. And when I read all these news items on Sci-Hub library genesis, it seems like that we have arrived to a single working model. This is how it should be done. This is the goal. This is the ideal that we should work towards. But as I was reading through in the last few weeks, all the discussions, not just what has been there in the public, but what's behind the doors of these communities, I realized that what from the outside seems like a unitary facade, the alternative of the shadow library was actually two competing models, two models which seem to be turning against each other, if you like. So I would like to spend some time dissecting this homogeneous understanding. This is the shadow library, and Sci-Hub and library genesis are interchangeable concepts, because that seem to be not the case. And it's not just the personal differences between the main leading figures of these two services. It's something more fundamental, and it's partly because they trade in different ways. Right? One is of articles, the other is of books. One is of ephemeral content, the other is of something more eternal. But it's also they have very different archival concepts. One, library genesis, is a heavily curated collection, relies on others to curate subsections that were integrated into the library. Sci-Hub is just a proxy, it's an interface. It's not curated. It's very difficult to actually curate millions and millions of scientific articles. And that curation makes a difference. That curation is what gives an archive the identity. If I would like to, if I have to find a different metaphor, then Sci-Hub is about access, and library genesis is about archiving. One is streaming. It's about streaming. Sci-Hub is streaming articles. Library genesis is owning books. And of course, the most visible difference is that Sci-Hub has chosen to be a radically visible project, seeking, betting its survival on publicity, and library genesis prefers to be in the shadows, remains anonymous and in hiding, and most of the tension is rooted here, that library genesis people don't seem to like the publicity that they are getting from this whole situation. So if you ask them, and if you try to reconstruct their philosophies, it seems like that Sci-Hub has betted its future on a revolution, and it's doing everything it can to foster a revolution. And library genesis has actually a manifesto in the making. It's debated at this moment, where one of the key statements of the founders is that we should avoid any action that upends the careful balance of the whole system of book publishing and production and distribution and retailing. So they believe in gradual evolutionary steps rather than a radical upheaval of the status quo. So it goes back to this question, these different approaches go back to the same question of is there anything in the status quo that's worth preserving? Or we have reached a point where we can and we should be doing away with whatever we have built for the last decades or centuries even. What is that we can carry over into this future that we have the proof of concept of? And what is that we have to cut loose? And it's a very difficult question because it's not just something that can be easily answered by traditional publishing models are done. Right? it makes no sense to do publishing as we have done. It's more complex than that, and every such statement may have quite far-reaching consequences. Of course, publishing is one of those stakeholders where we have to ask this question of what do we want to preserve from publishing, and it's a very difficult question, because if you look at the copyright notice of how Verso published the writings of Aaron Swartz, then this should be carved into stone to commemorate the schizophrenic situation of publishing in the 21st century. Right? This should be put into front pages of copyright laws. This is madness in print. How do you republish in print form the writings of the prophet of the martyr of guerrilla open access with a copyright notice slapped on it, via left-wing publishing, which is an imprint of New Left books. This is I don't know what I should elaborate where I can elaborate on that. It's very difficult to say which line is something that we should be preserving. The New Left books is the thing that we're carrying over. Is it Verso that we're carrying over? Is it the copyright notice that we're carrying over? Is it the traditional models that we're carrying over? There's those distinctions that publishing, scholarly as academic publishing, still heavily relies on something that can be sustained in the future. That's the distinction between preprint and postprint, and preprint peer review and postprint self-archiving, something that makes sense in the age of archive.org and PLOS1 and all those repositories of preprints and collaborative peer review. Can publishing be maintained? If I see academic colleagues of mine, writing this comment on Facebook, I don't know what I should do, write an article for tenure or write a blog post for relevance. What to do with self-publishing and archives. I'm not a publisher, and I'm agnostic about publishers, but I don't know. But I would hate to lose some publishers. Maybe it's just a bad routine on my side. They are the evils, of course, right? And we have a face for evil. It's Elsevier, that is the evil. But the question is everyone like Elsevier? Is everyone like Springer? Is there a space for differentiation between different approaches and publishers? Is there a space in business, in economics, in finance, where you can differentiate between different publishing models? Is the future that shadow libraries and guerrilla open access are proposing, is the solution is something that fits all? Is it just the outrageous profits that is the problem, or are we struggling with a more systematic problem within publishing? That's one question that we need to be able to find answers for. The other major stakeholder group that we have to note is, of course, libraries, right? And libraries are nice people. I don't know anyone who, I know a single person who hates librarians, but I was really surprised to meet him, actually, and it's probably some bad childhood experience. I don't know anyone who wouldn't hug a librarian. But they are doing something incredible, right? They are networking IDs and IDs and IDs and people and people and people, and dead and unborn, and that's really something that, as a function, should be preserved. And it's not just the books; it's the community. Libraries, first and foremost, is a community, and the building is not just a building to store the text, but rather to enable these networking opportunities of across times and cultures. So something like that should be preserved, and I'm not sure that we can do that without a physical space. There are much more qualified people in this group who know more about that. One question I would like to raise is how to create a physical space around collections and the corresponding communities. But libraries have a problem, right? And that problem is that they are not controlling their own fate. They have been in charge of their own fate as long as they had their own legal exceptions, their spaces in which they were free to operate. But that moment has passed with the digital lending, or the lack of the opportunity to lend digitally. And now, instead of being in control in their own fate and adapting to whatever is expected of them to provide, they are forced to act as unwilling enforcers of copyrights and IDs that they are not necessarily free with. And that's a very unpleasant place to be. And they are very unpleasant. They are also very in a very unpleasant place because they are the ones being held responsible for whatever shadow librarians are doing. They are the ones who are leaking those documents. They are the ones who are made responsible for not allowing any leak of these articles, not allow any leak of the digital books, and it will be their future on the strings if copyright holders decide to punish libraries for the actions of the shadow libraries. For that, the fate of libraries carries a really nice promise, if you like, and that promise is the extraterritoriality of the library. Right? Libraries were like embassies. If you enter the library, the rules, the standard rules of intellectual property protection suddenly get suspended. At least those that applied for the commercial part of knowledge distribution were were invalid, no longer invalid. But that extraterritoriality has ended, right? Because there is no such extraterritoriality in terms of the digital. There are very few, actually. And without that extraterritoriality, the libraries are doomed. We cannot speak about libraries. So if there is a promise that we can, if there is anything that worth preserving, it's not just the libraries, but libraries with their extraterritorial rights in terms of within the knowledge economy. And of course, the elephant in the room is what is to do with the open access movement, right? Because guerrilla open access or radical open access or Sci-Hub is actually a nod to the importance of open access, right? It just made it very clear and very apparent that open access is a failure, right? And we can, and it's a failure not because it has not achieved significant changes in how future production is being made accessible, right? If we measure by that, if we measure by the official policies of the US and the EU, the two largest investors in science production, and they managed to make sure that publicly funded research is openly accessible, and that's huge, right? We should laud them for that. But they have imagined a future which very much looks like the past. They have decided to to go down a path where they wanted to act nice, and they didn't want to make all the incumbents angry. And that created a path dependency for open access, for the official open access. A path dependency which carried over into the future all the malaise of the past in terms of this very basic assumption that knowledge is a legitimate object of commodification. It's a legitimate object of commerce. It's a legitimate object of profit making. It's a legitimate object of business considerations. And by this decision, it has carried all the old incumbents and intermediaries into the future, which, well, created some funny situations, right? We are now paying twice. We are paying for the past in terms of access fees, and we are now paying for the future in terms of article processing fees. Rather than, if we did nothing, we should be just paying once subscriptions and have more or less the same social global justice apart. So I don't know if open access is something that is part of this future that some of the shadow librarians or guerrilla open access people are imagining. And you can see the tension. You see that Peter Sober, who is the granddaddy or the godfather of open access, publicly distancing himself first from Aaron's thoughts and then from Sci-Hub for reasons that are not quite apparently transparent. If you read him, you see that it strengthens publishers' arguments that open access proper is illegal, which is kind of a strange argument, because who would argue that when the EU mandates public open access publication policies. So I suspect that there is another reason behind, but it's not transparent, so we don't know. So going back to this original question, what is worth it preserving the status quo? And we have two answers, right? We have one answer, at least two answers from the shadow libraries. One answer is that of the Science Hub, right? Science Hub is the goal, and changing the system is one of the ways to achieve it. But we are not discussing this goal at all. And the answer of library genesis is a more cautious one. It's like, and their strategy reflects that cautiousness. We don't know what the goal is. We don't know how the future should look like. We don't know what's worthy of preserving. So let's move gradually. Let's try to be as disruptive as possible. Let's always provide the alternative to be there, but not in a way that would create open conflict in any sense. How do we define the goal? This is something, or what is the goal? This is something that I'm yet to really find a consistent formulation of within this discourse on the future of publishing, the future of science, the future of access. I see the access part discussed quite a lot, whether universal, global, unconditional access is whether it's a vertical or not. But I don't see a systematic or a systemic discussion on the whole, rather than just the final step. And there are some serious alternatives to consider. What are the structural changes that we are aiming at? What are the structural changes that we are imposing unintentionally by supporting one alternative or the other, or all, or none? What does it make? What kind of futures are we building when I'm actually uploading stuff that I shouldn't be uploading? What kind of future I'm feeding when I make decisions to publish or not to publish in open access or closed journals. What are the structural changes that I'm preventing or feeding when I take this or that decision? Going back to Manuel Delanda's tools of understanding chaotic systems, I'd like to turn to some tendencies which seem to be there within the system. And of course, one of the tendencies that define possible outcomes is technology. And I would like to, my personal story is it may be interesting in this sense. I started out as a Creative Commons person more than a decade ago, and we actually were very enthusiastically translating Creative Commons licenses from English to Hungarian, like home culture. And we were very proud that we managed to translate not just the text, not just the legal concepts, but also the cultural baggage around Creative Commons. And we were very proudly trying to introduce this concept into an Eastern European country. And I know that Tom and Marcela have also been busy with something similar in Croatia. It took me a while to recognize that Creative Commons is a very strange thing, because it's a very particular solution to a very particular problem, which we did not have at that time. I guess we still don't have in Eastern Europe. It took me some time to realize that Creative Commons, and I would just lump open access with it to a certain extent, is a response to a very particular US situation, to a hyper-aggressive legal culture which prevented the creative use of copyrighted works, which was not the case in Hungary. No one gave a damn about people remixing stuff. The problem was not people getting sued for participating in the remix culture. The problem was not having access in the first place, right? And it turned out that the solution to our problem was not Creative Commons, because that didn't give access. The solution was piracy. So I got involved into piracy research, and it took me some time, and that time ended or started, or at that time happened 2 years ago. For me to realize that piracy or copyright is not an interesting topic anymore, because it's just a side conflict, a skirmish in a much larger scheme around technology, and that is counter-surveillance. Everything that's happening in the copyright domain, every possible outcome that can be there, the survival of all the piratical alternatives, is dependent upon the outcome of the surveillance, counter-surveillance market in the technological domain. If and when the powers that be manage to prohibit encryption technologies and privacy-enhancing technologies, at that point this whole copyright debate is over, right? Because if you can prohibit counter-surveillance technologies, then you can enforce copyright in the digital domain. If the technological opportunities to resist and counter surveillance persist, then there will be always the technological tools to infringe upon copyright. So the important debate to follow, the important conflict to follow, is not the copyright, piracy, peer-to-peer debate, but what's happening with Tor and encryption. So whatever is happening within that technological domain is interesting, and whatever we are trying to do in the knowledge domain is dependent upon those processes. It is also there is something that's happening within the geography, in space, is something that needs to be taken account. And geography in terms of pure space, physical space, and it's also about the geography of power and ideology, and also political systems. When I talk about the U.S. versus the West, it's about competing approaches to how knowledge is or should be treated and produced. The U.S. is the privatized higher education, where people are actually very afraid to actually speak out, and they are right to be afraid to speak out because Aaron Schwartz has been, the case has been made. What happens to you if you happen to speak out? That's a highly aggressive legal culture with an almost complete lack of tax-funded public sector within this domain. So one model is on the extreme reliance on markets to produce higher education and science, and an extreme failure of these markets to fill in the gaps and resist the tendencies for markets to be ever more concentrated. Of course, we see a completely different approach here in the EU, in Europe, and it's even better in reverse, if you like, as we move eastwards. But that's the center and periphery. We can of course take a look at the maps, right, and understand these conflicts or these tensions and these tendencies. It's of course the question of development and the developing, and how intellectual property rules and actual technical services are used to maintain global inequalities between the developing and the developed. Right? So that's that part of the map. But it's also clear that that's of course you might be familiar. That's the Sci-Hub blog put on the map. We also see that that the developing world is also a heavy user. So it's not just a control within. It's not just a control of global injustices, but it's also something, an issue within developed world, and differences within the European Union. And you see that, and this is a similar map, but that of library genesis, and the per capita usage of library genesis during a certain period, 3-month period, a couple of years ago. You see that library genesis is being mostly used by Central and Eastern European countries. Recent additions to the European Union, joining the single market, the job market, the education market, the innovation market, the capital markets, and for them, for us, I would say, having access to knowledge under the same terms as the Dutch or the Danish or the Swedish were not sustainable. So these services like library genesis were used to lessen within EU competitive disadvantages and to catch up with the rest of the developed world while being part of it. Right?
Just a small comment. I think that it could be also that's the interesting one, that Spain, France, and Italy are not that heavy users because they don't use that much of English, and there are not that many books in their languages. It's a small remark.
Yes, that's quite possible, and I'm happy to get back to that because there are so many different readings of this one. But what I would like to point out is not necessarily Central and Eastern Europe, but of course Russia, which is the highest per capita user of library genesis. And of course, that goes back to the question of center and periphery, and the question of why in Russia are these services, or why in the post-Soviet world are these services situated. I will get back to that. And the final tendency I'd like to address is, of course, the political economy of this whole thing. Where on the one hand, we have the neoliberal dogma, which relies on the market to address market failures, which is rather incapable of addressing market concentration and mergers and acquisitions with all the negative consequences. And where the digitization actually enabled the final enclosure of the public domain by creating a new set of rights which were not treated under the same rules as old copyrights. On the other hand, we have communist and post-communist periphery, which is crucial in understanding why these services are in Russia or in post-Soviet republics, and what makes them thrive there. And I've been writing about that a little bit. But certainly the Soviet growth of samizdat and black markets are something that came handy after the system change, and were put into use when this new quite exciting toy of the computers and the FidoNet came around, and were mobilized to build a quite radical bottom-up digital library scene. And that is still something, that's a legacy that still defines many of the ideas that I can agree from those circles. Of course, it helps that at the periphery, of course, what defines the periphery is, of course, the lack of control or the strength of control. The more you move towards the outside, the less power is there to enforce the common set of rules, and that leaves more space for these temporary autonomous zones, to invoke Hakim Bey here, where alternatives can flourish, and we see these alternatives in action as it is now. Of course, there is this whole communism idea started with Lastic, and upon which Creative Commons open access is built upon. But as I've mentioned earlier, communism is an effort. As I read the Commons approach coming from the U.S., it's an effort to create a public sphere based on the neoliberal premises of the private ownership of information and knowledge, and that's something which is doomed to fail, in my opinion. It's something that cannot be done. You cannot have your cake and eat it at the same time. It has been a long shot to create a public domain based on private ownership of information and market finance production, on voluntary individual participation, and on enlightening self-interest. But we see the limits of that approach. So what we need to think is not post-communism, but post-communism. What comes after that? And when I have the chance and the opportunity to talk to Americans on the contrast of ideas, I think within Europe, especially within Northern Europe, we are in a very privileged position with very strong traditions of publicly funded, tax-funded public sector, right? Then we are allowed to ask the question: should we do away with any market-based approach when it comes to scholarly knowledge production a question that's not even a valid question in North America. Within the science fiction literature, singularity also has its meanings, its own meaning, and it's a rhetorical or literary tool to allow for the divergence of narratives, alternative universes. This is the starting point of alternative universes and alternative histories. And I believe that we are in such a point, if we stick to this science fiction understanding of the term singularity, and we have a number of alternative universes already in the making. One is the radical transparency of Sci-Hub, and whatever it takes, a revolutionary approach to changing the status quo. We have the library genesis approach, which prefers and probably will continue to lurk in the background, acting like the second foundation, if you like, from the shadows, trying to achieve gradual changes. We have the very polite and very system-conform approach of the open access proper, which does its own thing with the hope that at the end of the day it will end up in liberating the past, not just the future. And of course we have the let's act as if nothing has happened and continue with the business as usual approach. I don't know what is the best strategy, which one will survive in the long term. Maybe the best strategy, individual strategy for all of us, is to actually invest in all and support each and bet on all horses. I don't know. But any single bet has to answer questions that I do not see answers in. But if you do, then I would be very happy to hear about those answers, because I'm lost. Maybe you're not. Maybe because you're not lost because you have much more experience. Or if you do, please share. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your excellent talk. There's so many different strands here. I think we should just open it up for discussion, comments, reactions, provocations.
Wonder, well, this just to clarify, what is your working definition of a shadow library? Well, you, well, I think that the two, let's say, landmark examples of shadow libraries would be Library Genesis and Sci-Hub. So would you, let's say, consider archive.org shadow library when archive.org allows users to submit any files without any...
No. For the library to be in the shadow, you need to be, at least that's my working definition, have to have an element of infringement or illegality. This is why you prefer to stay in the shadow.
It can conform with takedowns quite a lot. For instance.
That's very clear. Why is that? Within the voluntary copyright enforcement, actually, it's not that uncommon, even in piratical communities. And the reason for that is that the long-term survival of the collection as a whole is more important than any individual part of the collection. And if you can ensure the long-term survival of the collection, then you're willing to make sacrifices at the edges. This is what I see in working or written down when it comes to RADiCAL or Library Genesis rules. The long-term survival of the collection trumps every other consideration. And that's a pretty that's a pretty good motivation. So if the decision is whether you comply sometimes and have most of it, or don't comply and then be the public enemy number one, then the first strategy seems to be more successful in terms of ensuring the survival.
To what degree do you think that two models reflect two different habituses of scholarly journal publishing and scholarly books publishing, or textbook publishing? So that those would be three communities. It's recently that Association of American Scholarly Book Publishers has come out, and they have kind of made the claim that they are something very different from scholarly journal publishers, that their model is very different, and they are getting caught in the midst of the struggle between Elsevier, that is scholarly journal publishers, and Sci-Hub.
Yeah, there are so many claims flying around of people, and the goal of these claims is to actually trying to differentiate yourself from, like, the Elseviers or the bad guys or the good guys, and it's all about trying to make sure that I'm not identified with. Of course, there are differences between the function of journal publishing and book publishing. The journal publishing is ephemeral, like it trades in an ephemeral material. There is a very difficult to define what is canonical in terms of journal articles. Books are a more long-term condensation of a consensus, if you like, or of an ideas. It's more, it takes more time to write, it takes more time to read, it has more longevity, and so on and so on. So of course there are differences, but when it comes to the business models of do we need journal publishers, then you ask Alexandra and she will say, no, we don't need journal publishers. We have archive.org, or we have the LS1 fund publishers. If you ask Library Genesis people, they will say, no, we don't. We need the journal publishers because they have an important role. We don't need book publishing, because who would need a book publisher in the age of self-publishing? So these are all claims put forward to carve out a differentiated position. I don't know how to make right of those claims. I don't know. That's one of my problems. I don't know what is the value proposition for publishing in the next. What are we paying for? Do we need to pay for that? How do we need to pay for that? But I also see that the two strategies are, they are not tied to the actual medium. Like, it's the Pirate Bay versus a private torrent tracker. It's like the Pirate Bay went forward and said, we're gonna put a public space behind our actions, we're gonna be very loud, very obnoxious, we're gonna be very visible, and we hope that these actions will actually protect us, right? Or people will protect us, or visibility will protect us, or prominence will protect us. It didn't. But that was the hope. And then you see those private torrent trackers that we don't even know their names of, which are there in the background and serving particular communities quite well without ever getting on the radar screen. That's there for music, that's there for films, that's there for books, that's there for scholarly work. It's not dependent on the actual journal versus book, I guess.
So I'm interested in one particular thing when you said that Library Genesis is curated and Sci-Hub is not. So I think that in order to maintain the whole kind of a system. That very important thing is that you have a well-defined author and then you have a well-defined product. So these boundaries should be kind of clear, and then only after that you can really maintain the whole system and commodification. So part of what we all do is also to recognize and capture how the blurry boundaries, and that's what we were trying to do with custodians. So in a way to recognize the working class behind, which is usually like not getting not getting enough of whatever recognition and value and all of that. So it seems to me that at least I can see that the Science Hub is also curated. I mean, maybe even more, because it comes through the certain kind of selective, like a peer review, and then I mean there is a whole like a very complex hierarchy how you get just the production of the scientific articles, but then at the same time the demand, which the way how the articles are stored are coming from the very particular request, which again we can say that it's a very kind of a gradual, very kind of many small curators who are doing that through their needs. So in that sense, I'm interested in which way you see that difference, because it seems to me that that the claim that Science Hub is curated,
Not correct.
huh?
That is not correct.
That is not curated, yeah, and the other one is. It seems to me that I'm interested how you made that kind of distinction, and at the same time I'm interested how do you see that, how important is to recognize the curation and that whole kind of, because I see it like very important.
Yeah. Well, the extreme example is what you do with the memory of the world, right? You allow people to actually act as librarians and share personal collections. That's what you do, Shandu. It's you maintain a very tightly maintained and overseen and managed collection, which is very sometimes very personal, sometimes reflects institutional interests or histories, but there is always this element of somehow being able to define a canon, right? A shared importance, a measure of this is what we need to have in this building in order to define our identity. The individual or the community is defined through the collection, right? The two are not separable and presuppose each other.
But I would still see Alexander actually selecting which databases, which this journal silos to include in this database is also a choice. I don't know how well the, let's say, non-Anglophone journal databases are included or not, whether there are Indian journals, whether there are Chinese journals in a Science Hub or not. And these are already choices she has made. And the question is to what extent this can be looked upon as a rating.
In that sense, Library Genesis is also making is also rooted in this Western, North American or English-speaking scholarly tradition. That was your remark as well. It's like where are the French works, where are the Spanish works from all these collections, and there are very few, right? This is not the Francophone science, not even the German-speaking science. It's very English, Anglo-American, which reflects and also reinforces the current power imbalances and invisibilities, because if I as an educator don't have access to works in my own language, then maybe an English language substitute is a second best choice, but it's a good enough choice. Right? So it acts against doing education or research or science in your own language. It crowds out by not providing the full set of choices. Yeah, that's right.
Do you know the cases where the like a Library Genesis didn't accept some of the collections or some of the books?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so they in that sense they select.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's a huge debate of whether to include or not, first of all, the Sci-Hub collection in the first place. But there were many collections that they didn't include the Chinese collection. There were, but there was some conscious decision not to include. And the guy behind the
Why? It would be interesting to why they wouldn't include this Chinese collection.
because they're not because it's too large and they don't have domain expertise. So I know that Library Genesis probably is done by a national scientist. By his references, I think he's a quantum physicist, and he has his domain of what's relevant, where are the relevant publications being made, and that's not China.
They do link to them, though, or at least for a time they did, to the two main .cn equivalent. So Sci-Hub, LibGen doesn't link to them, at least in the formal kind of. They view them as allies, but they won't mirror their content. But they're happy if the Chinese sites mirror their content. So
can I ask one question, or is there? Oh, go ahead. Oh, I have a very naive question. I mean, it seems like the whole picture of the struggle and fight seems to be divided into the ones who are trying to put a lock on something, and then a group that is trying to break the lock. But somehow I'm kind of missing this whole debate. The ones who are constructing this something that the lock is being put on, in a way. In other words, I'm missing the presence of the cultural producers. In a broader debate, I mean, I know that you were talking mostly about the production of scientific articles, but I'm talking more about the whole kind of, cultural production in a way, which includes sound, whatever, music, video, and so on. I'm wondering if you see a possibility for developing a model that would kind of emerge maybe from that third field, so to speak.
It's an interesting question. With music and especially audiovisual content, there is a clear separation between the producer and the consumer, right? And piracy was a consumer revolution. Here, I think that it's not a consumer revolution. It's because the producers are the same as the consumers, and it's a producer revolution in a sense that it's us who feed the system with publications are betting on different horses, right. By uploading and sharing and support and whatnot. And that's something that it's super interesting whether you can actually achieve a radical change in any status quo without giving your name and face to it, and whether you can actually promote any systemic change from behind masks. I very much loathe privacy-enhancing technologies because they enable us to be, a completely respectable corporate citizen and a leaker, right? And a completely respectable Department of Defense employee and a deep folk, and that's great if technologies enable us to maintain multiple identities and enable U.S. scholars in Ivy League universities to pretend that they condone piracy and be a pirate in the same time, right? That's really nice. But and that has taken us so far. It enabled this whole insurgency. But on the other hand, I'm afraid that it also has its limits, and this is why I was so happy that the custodians online thing came forward. That why Tom and Marcel initiated this thing, because it actually put names behind the resistance, and it was not like some kind of ooh, we are very sad that library.mu and Gigapedia went down. It was a terrible, and we write those eulogies, right? And it's not about, ooh, I'm Anonymous 127 sharing some books somewhere, but it's actually people with something to lose, and there are some here in this room are put quite some lot on online, and their sacrifice should be acknowledged. And I don't think, but what I'm afraid of is that without those sacrifices, this is how far we can get, right? If you don't make it sure is that as a producer, in your capacity as a producer, you are not willing to feed this system anymore, then we just perpetuate the status quo.
Oh, yes, I had kind of just a general comment or observation. I really liked your point that piracy is a manifestation of kind of the broader counter-surveillance struggle. And I think a particularly pernicious convergence of that, to go back to your recent example of Verso, who are, again, fucking up and releasing source of stuff, not just with a copyright, with Lessig, of course, participating in it too, but the ebooks are also all individually watermarked as well. Or at least they were. Now the guy who Aaron entrusted to is contesting that with Verso, but that hasn't been fully resolved, or just as the ebooks already purchased now already have individual watermarks. And we see that permeating the entire landscape, not just with Verso, but for instance, Amazon, they've now corrupted the open EPUB standard to inject their own, I forgot the exact variable name, I think it's the UBKID, which injects a unique serial into EPUBs and ACWs that you convert from Amazon. And not only that, but then they also go on to now inject metadata into the image of the cover in that EPUB too, has unique tracing and SIFs too. So that particular convergence of privacy and piracy, I think, is permeating this entire discourse really too. And one of the aims then is to bring that to the fore, to show that when you're reading an ebook, you're not just reading more or less a vanilla book that you picked off the shelf. You're reading a uniquely identifiable item that can be traced back to you for whatever potential purposes.
Well, in a way, it was, well, I mean, on a very first level, what is quite astonishing to me, I don't know why he chose to do so. Ornsworth himself, of course, didn't use any CC mark or anything on his blog, so I wonder whether he had to know what he's doing, right? And I think he wanted to keep this kind of control over his works, despite Guerrilla Access Manifesto and so on. So there is this inner contradiction in his own action. So it's not so what he was writing about. It's not so one-sided that everything should be free and so on, because he himself didn't really follow the suit. And what Verso and New Press left to be doing is just a consequence of his own kind of work in progress ideas. Probably he didn't have answers himself, like what to do, what is the best thing to do with his own writing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't blame so much these publishers. Well, I don't know too much about the story, like the background, what was happening on a publisher's in the publisher's office, but still they were dealing with copyrighted material, of which was, as far as I understood, the control of which was forwarded or given to this other person. I forgot his name.
Oh, yeah.
The estate manager.
Yeah. So, in a way, this is well, my common sense would tell me that this was probably something to prohibit or prevent Amazon publishing his writing as a book and sell them for whatever, like this kind of thing.
Yeah, we call this the veterinary horse. This artifact where you can demonstrate all kinds of Malays. There it's like why there wasn't a copyright notice or CC notice on the original blog. What was the reason for that? How do you treat the estate? Does it make any sense to publish something that's already accessible through the internet? What is the value added in packaging all those blog posts into an EPUB? Why don't you release the EPUB free? So there are a zillion questions that we don't have answers for, but it's not the answers that are interesting, but the questions that they raise. For me, it's like this really is like a surrealist masterpiece. It's painted by Dali. This whole situation.
But pretty much, the whole story was quite predictable. The publishers did their job. They published the copyrighted versions of the writings, and then these libraries published the pirated versions of these writings, and the writings are still on the blog. So, yeah,
but also publishers got it right. I mean, like also, book is not available in US in particular, So it's just that they all made a
normally there's two markets, and if you want to publish in both, you have either a subsidiary or you have other publisher.
I understand that. It's just that I think that these are the signs of a schizophrenia, like where you don't want to have that. So whoever, it's just like whatever is that, like a biblical story where you come with a kid and then like who's the mother and the one who will just give up because it cares. Like what's the name? When they're like one mother is like
it was
someone
judgment.
And then it needs to, and then the true mother say, okay, I give up because I don't want my kid to be split because then it dies. Whatever the famous story. So I think that's what happened to them. It's just that they didn't show that they care, because all of these signs just made so many people pissed off, because these are the signs which we were all waiting for. And if you are not able to do that in that way, you're not doing a good job in publishing that, because you didn't show that you care. And that's what Punctum Books, that's where they came up with the letter and the demand, and then like a huge number, it's like more than 300 intellectuals who signed that, or even more, I don't know, like maybe now thousands, or So I think that's what how these stories are ending up now. It's kind of, it's, I don't know, it's this, people get very excited about how symbolically, how the whole thing will be delivered, because we care. And then, like any of a publisher have that responsibility not to blow it up. And it seems that they did, so they did all of the mistakes you could expect. And these publishers were kind of the ones which we which we see as some of the best. It's so they blew it up. So it's just imagine how that would look like if some others were trying to do that, and how much of the misunderstandings then would happen.
I think in a way it reflects their confusion, but it also reflects their predicament. No, both the New Press and Verso are the epitome of left publishers, and they are operations that are struggling to survive in the market. Verso is surviving by someone being there to write out the check whenever it gets into a problem, and I guess the New Press depends really on philanthropy, but that's a problem larger than simply them, and they are obviously not able to think it through when addressing a particular case such as this one, no? Because it breaks their model, or the model is broken, or it shows that it's broken in a way. And for them it's hard to articulate an alternative because they are not in a position where they could push through an alternative, though they might be able in some way, one or the other, to conceptualize it. I mean,
the same happened with the documentary, if you remember. But it was like for sure the period of time, but also it was published with the sign that it's like it was not available in number of countries because of the whole like a system. So they just couldn't. They couldn't, or they didn't want to change that. So after a while, the documentary got available. But at first, and everybody were waiting for that, so it was like people would wait for the minute when it will be published. And they're like, what the fuck, It's not available in this country, this is just like ridiculous. And then, of course, you could see that it was published on so many like different, whatever, a shadow of corners of the internet.
Yeah. I don't think this is one of my claims, and I don't think that Verso could have done anything else. This is your point as well. So it's not it's not that Verso fucked up. It's that the system does not allow them to do anything else, and that's the problem. Is that we have reached a point where just there is pressure building in the system without the possibility of release. And we are waiting for this tipping point where something happens. But I don't know what will be happening, right? I don't see an escape, an exit. Do you?
In this pre-singularity state, you've said bet on all horses, but I'm wondering if you could say what you see as potentially the biggest risks. Like, would it be, I've taken some notes of what potential risks might be, but you'll know better. Is it the commodification of our knowledge? Is that one of the biggest risks? Is it radically reduced circulation of knowledge and intellectual ideas? Is it an impact on cultural production, which is getting to Jasek's point? Or is it actually people being sued, fined, arrested? Is it the risk of legal action? Or am I missing a whole other spectrum of what might be about to happen just pre-singularity?
My biggest sadness is that while we were all cheerleading, I'm certainly did that, so I take responsibility. So while we were all cheerleading this Californian ideology of how technology will be an emancipatory force of and liberate everything, there was a parallel story which got very little attention up until it was too late, and that was that the technology has a super dystopian potential. And what you've raised, actually, I think that's the poster boy, that's the poster child. When a book becomes a tool of oppression and control because of the baked-in ideas and phrases. And that's clearly something that we are heading towards if we rely on the market. And it's a soft copyright enforcement, or it's just marketing and gathering data on the readers, or so. I don't, even if I don't assign any badwill on behalf of those who do it, actually that does not change the fact that tools are being made as tools of control and oppression, and that you cannot go around, right? Everything derives from that that fact, whether it's individual control or whether that's perpetuation of global inequalities. It's all the same in different disguise.
And when you read Manuel Delanda, his understanding of chaotic systems, are you basing a sense of structural disruption out of Delanda? I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you use Delanda in your argument as whether it could be something we could enact, or whether he's observing
I'm using
systems.
Delanda as an analytical tool to understand situations where there is very little rule of thumb to mobilize to describe a situation. I think in all these domains where there are these technology-induced potentials for radical transformation, which are happening in slow motion, like a train wreck in slow motion, the best you can hope for is that you are able to identify those tendencies that a system has potentials, more likely outcomes than not. And what he offers in this work, I'm using philosophy and simulation, is it's actually this tool set. It's not a normative sense, and at least I don't use it in a normative sense rather than an analytical tool.
And is it his new work, you said? What is it?
It's philosophy and simulation.
What would you say to people who say, well, the commons, right? That started in software, right? So it's been used there longest, and we now have a very healthy software commons. There's quite a bit of free software, and it's open access, and people collaborate. It seems like it was successful in software. Would you say? Do you have a response to? So it's easy for people to think
You know,
it's gonna succeed.
I was thinking about that before you asked that question, but there's a difference in software. You have these natural monopolies, like with an operating system. You know, there's a reason like Microsoft Windows was worth $1 billion, and all these other operating systems in the '80s, they all made people hundreds of millions of dollars, and then GNU was free, and it had the same sort of natural monopoly dynamic where, you know, the users of the system are kind of locked into it, but they're not exploited through that power. It's just it perpetuates itself through the lock-in mechanism, right? Software has that, and that doesn't translate to, you know, other domains.
So the lack of a monopoly would make the strategy.
It's a natural monopoly. It's not like a, you know, it's just like, you know, GCC. It perpetuates itself in a or whatever software, you know, or an operating system. And people are even if they're, you know, they're not locked in the same sense, but, you know, they're locked in.
I don't expect me to enumerate all the possible causes, but my experience from the last 15 years have been is that there were always these keynotes and talks that, oh, let's look at free and open source software, look at Wikipedia, and this is going to be the future. And you know, we were always waiting for the third item in the list, and that third item never came. And the promise always have been that we're gonna be able to carry over.
There's also a cultural aspect of it, right? Like, when the Commons was born, we had less of a copyright culture when it was born. When the GPL started, right, and especially in software, there was already a widespread attitude of like, you know, we share, it's digital, it's information, it's free. So it was a different cultural context. So maybe the strategy would work that worked then might not work now. And also, there's also the coincidence. You said monopoly. I know this isn't the point you were trying to make, but like there was, like for the GPL became very successful with Linux, but that was like some weaker corporate actors who are nevertheless very strong, but they're weaker in the market relative to some monopoly. They wanted to resist that other business's power, and so they started supporting the open source, you know, feeding it and helping it and funding it. So they did that. That might be something that might have potential going forward. I don't know.
I would like to add, like, yeah, this is the interesting one. I think that the first is, I think that the first important thing is to also notice and capture that the essential parts of the infrastructure today are mostly done in corporations. And this is now like a free software, whatever the widest kind of idea of that platform is driven by the interest of the market pretty much. So in that sense, there were a couple of loopholes, like the one why we were getting a GPL3 instead of GPL2, because there were like a whatever Amazon, the famous one was TiVo, but also the Google, Amazon, Facebook, eBay, and all of these, they were able to use a free software, build their distributed technologically, so distributed technologies, but at the same time they appear to the world pretty much like a mainframe because of the organizational and other ways how they intervene into the world. So I think that we lost that, and then there are other examples how the community driven and how the community built software is kind of like losing. For example, Canonical famously started as a poster boy that the business is possible, that the business can like really nicely work with the community. That's not the case. Already like after a few years, but today they're just like rebuilding the whole stack because they want to have a control, because they got in trouble with GNOME community and other communities. So in that sense, I think that it's very hard to talk that nice, shiny story of the GPL, and I'm disappointed. I'm not trying to say, oh, I knew that from the very beginning, and it was the historical sequences where something can be disruptive, but then there are also like other forces which just like get it somewhere else, and I think that today it's appropriated and it serves pretty much everything what we are talking here. And at the same time, I think that there is also, we pointed at like a few times, maybe we will point that tomorrow, is that there is that idea that when you're like in a center or close to the center, that alternative is possible, that you can build the parallel world, so then you will compete because that world will be so much better than the one we have. And I think that that's the kind of a belief of omnipotency which only can come from the center, and also many times it's blinded by the same kind of center, and that's what I think it happened to GPL. I don't think that it was ever possible that we can build the parallel culture. You know, in software you can replace something because it's running, and if you have like a compiler, it compiles. But you cannot like recreate Prince in any way. There is no like anymore. There is no Mickey Mouse. There is no. These things are so much different, and I think that that's where we can learn from periphery. and periphery never had that kind of belief, oh, we can build that alternative world, because it's pretty much about the appropriation and also, like, in that sense, stealing. And I think that this is the moment where we are today, and why it's politically important, because there is no, in my opinion, there is no illusion that we can build a parallel, whatever culture, we can build a parallel science, we can build whatever. That's just not possible. It was never like that. It will never be like that. And GPL also taught us some of these lessons, I would say. But for a while, GPL was like brilliant. I mean, it's a brilliant, but I would rather see it as a historical sequence than something which is static in a time, and then we can just use it forever as an example. I don't think that we can use it anymore as an example. In many ways, I don't want to get into the parts of the stack and what Apple is doing, how the GPL is replaced with what they call business-friendly licenses, and the LLVM against GCC. You mentioned GCC, and all of these kind of things. I think that it's quite a struggle there, and we cannot use it anymore as a clear example of.
I think that's what it ultimately comes down to, is the culture. It's a cultural struggle. The corporate interests have control over the media, and the culture. They erode the culture of sharing information over time, and then we end up more impoverished in that respect. When, so that's why it would be important to have very, like Sci-Lab, where you have very openly disregarding the copyright culture, so that because going underground legitimizes the overground. You know what I mean? So that's one thing, like a side effect of the GPL, is it legitimized software licenses, right? Before that?
I don't know. I really love the work of James Scott on hidden transcripts, and he was trying to understand why we don't have much more historical documents on popular resistance to power in England in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. And it's a great account of the fact that just because they didn't get into the history books, it doesn't mean that actually resistance was not taking place. And one strategy is to remain hidden in your resistance. That might be much more efficient than going into an unwinnable confrontation. And actually that actually took down the Soviet Union, right? So the Soviet Union was an unquestionable fact until the day it wasn't anymore. But that wasn't about, at least in the Soviet Union, it wasn't about people marching on the street. That last happened in '68 in Prague, and then a couple of years later in Poland with how do you call that, martial law in place for decades. So it wasn't direct confrontation that ate these systems away. It was this persistent, low-scale, low-intensity resistance, which consciously wanted to avoid being recognized as opposition. It's interesting what is the right strategy, and I personally, and my habitus is like, everyone shoot here, we should revolution. But I'm not sure that's in every case the most efficient way. I don't know.
But it's important that there are visible symbols. Right?
Yeah.
So that, because like he was saying, it's theft. Now, we talk about just copying a movie or something. They call it theft over in the United States. So. And then if the culture accepts that, then they accept it. You know, it doesn't matter what's technically possible. It's whatever the culture decides. So it's really a battle on the cultural space.
We'll continue many of these strands in terms of practical applications tomorrow throughout the day too. So, like I said, we'll start bright and early tomorrow at 9.